Tonight, I want to begin with a story. Not a story you heard on television, not a story announced in a speech, not a story printed in a newspaper, a story that lived inside one man's head. Because before there were missiles, before there were tanks, before there were mass graves and refugee columns and shattered cities, there was a story Vladimir Putin told himself about Ukraine, and he believed it. He believed that Ukraine was temporary, that its independence was an accident, that its democracy was artificial, that its leaders were placeholders, that its people were confused, that history would eventually correct itself, with or without consent. This story was not spontaneous. It was cultivated, repeated, refined, reinforced for years. It appeared in Putin's speeches, in essays, in closed-door meetings, in intelligence briefings, in school textbooks, in state media. Over time, it stopped sounding like propaganda. It became doctrine. And doctrine, when it replaces reality, becomes dangerous. Inside the Kremlin, this worldview shaped every decision. Analysts who warned that Ukraine would resist were dismissed. Diplomats who argued that the West would respond forcefully were ignored. Military planners who questioned timelines were sidelined. Anyone who challenged the narrative was treated as disloyal. The system learned very quickly what kind of information Putin wanted, and it gave it to him. Optimistic reports, simplified projections, minimized risks, assured victories. This is how authoritarian systems manufacture catastrophe, not through chaos, through agreement, through silence, through obedience. By late 2021, Russian forces were massing near Ukraine's borders. Western intelligence warned of invasion. Satellite images showed buildup. Logistics units were deployed. Field hospitals were prepared. Fuel depots were stocked. Everything pointed to war. But inside Moscow, officials insisted it was pressure, a bluff, a warning. They claimed no invasion was planned. They said Russia wanted dialogue, negotiation, security guarantees. And even as they said this, invasion orders were being finalized because Putin had already decided. In his mind, the outcome was predetermined. Ukraine would fall quickly, quietly, predictably. On February 24, 2022, that belief crossed the border. Missiles struck airports and command centers. Columns advanced toward Kyiv. Airborne troops landed near the capital. Special forces moved toward government buildings. The plan was decapitation, remove leadership, create panic, install control, end resistance before it could organize. It was supposed to be overwhelming, and for a few days it looked that way. Civilians fled. Traffic jammed highways, sirens wailed, explosions echoed, newsrooms prepared for the fall of Kyiv, foreign embassies evacuated, governments drafted contingency plans, the world braced for collapse, but collapse did not come. Instead, something unexpected happened. Ukraine organized. Local officials activated emergency systems. Volunteers formed supply chains. Territorial defense units recruited tens of thousands. Railway workers kept evacuation routes running. IT specialists secured communications. Doctors reorganized hospitals. Teachers turned basements into classrooms. It was not chaos. It was coordination. A society moving together under threat. Russian planners had not prepared for that. They had prepared for fear. They had prepared for paralysis. They had prepared for submission. They got resistance. Within days, Russian convoys stalled, fuel ran out, food ran short, communications failed. Maps were outdated. Units lost contact with commanders. Soldiers became stranded. Captured troops admitted they did not know where they were. Some believed they were on exercises. Others thought they were peacekeepers. Many had no idea why they were fighting. This confusion was not accidental. It was structural. It came from a leadership that believed its own myth. By March 2022, the assault on Kyiv had failed. Russian troops withdrew from northern Ukraine. They left behind burned vehicles, abandoned documents, and something else, evidence of executions, of torture, of mass graves, of systematic violence. What the world saw in places like Bucha and Irpin destroyed any remaining illusions. This was not a misunderstanding. This was conquest, and it changed everything. Western governments that had hoped for restraint now understood that neutrality was complicity. Military aid accelerated, sanctions expanded. Diplomatic isolation deepened. Ukraine was no longer standing alone. It was backed by a global coalition. For Putin, this was the second great miscalculation. He had expected hesitation, he got unity. He had expected division, he got coordination. He had expected fatigue, he got persistence. So he changed strategy. If he could not seize Ukraine quickly, like Sharchin, he would try to break it slowly. Missile strikes targeted power grids, water systems, heating networks, hospitals, residential buildings. Winter became a weapon. Darkness became a tactic. Cold became pressure. The goal was psychological collapse, make life unbearable, make resistance feel futile, make surrender seem rational. But Ukrainians adapted, generators appeared, repair crews worked under fire, energy systems were rebuilt, shelters expanded, communities reorganized, life continued, not because it was easy, because it was necessary. Parents sent children to school with emergency kits, doctors operated during blackouts, engineers repaired lines under shelling, couples married in uniform, funerals became routine, and still people planned futures. That was the deepest failure of Putin's strategy. He did not understand identity. He did not understand belonging. He did not understand home. You can destroy buildings. You cannot erase purpose. You can terrorize bodies. You cannot conquer meaning. Every missile strengthened what it was meant to break. Every blackout deepened resolve. Every attack created witnesses. By the end of the first year, the war had outgrown its original design. Russia was bleeding resources, losing equipment, losing influence, losing credibility. Ukraine was wounded, grieving, scarred, but still functioning, still organizing, still fighting, and the difference mattered. Because wars are not decided only by firepower. They are decided by legitimacy, by trust, by belief, by whether people think their struggle makes sense. Putin had launched this war believing Ukraine's identity was fragile. He discovered it was unbreakable. He believed history was on his side. He learned that history does not obey power. And now, years later, we are watching the consequences of that original story unfold across battlefields, across economies, across families, across generations. This war did not begin with a missile. It began with a lie. By the summer of 2022, it was clear that Ukraine had accomplished the first impossible task. It had survived. It had kept its government functioning. It had preserved its sovereignty. It had stopped the collapse that Vladimir Putin had assumed was inevitable. But survival, Ukrainian leaders understood, was only the beginning. Survival buys time. And time demands strategy, because no nation can remain permanently in emergency mode. No society can live forever on adrenaline and improvisation. If Ukraine was going to endure, it had to transform. And that transformation began with partnership. What emerged over the following months was not simply foreign aid. It was something far more complex. It was an ecosystem, a web of intelligence sharing, weapons transfers, training programs, maintenance networks, logistical corridors, and political coordination. It stretched from Washington to London, from Berlin to Warsaw, from Oslo to Ottawa, from Tokyo to Canberra. Dozens of governments, hundreds of agencies, thousands of officials, all aligning around a single objective: make sure Ukraine does not lose, and then quietly make sure Ukraine can win. At first, this cooperation was cautious. Each weapons package was debated. Each delivery weighed against escalation risks. Each system introduced gradually: anti-tank weapons, then artillery, then air defense, then long-range rockets, then armored vehicles, then advanced drones, step by step, because every step crossed a psychological threshold. But Ukraine kept demonstrating responsibility. Western intelligence agencies watched how weapons were used. They saw discipline, they saw accountability, they saw strategic restraint. Ukraine did not squander resources, it maximized them. That built trust. And trust unlocked capability. One of the most important shifts was intelligence integration. Before 2022, Ukraine had limited situational awareness. After 2022, it was connected to a global surveillance network, satellite imagery, signals interception, radar tracking, drone feeds, cyber monitoring, all flowing into Ukrainian command. For the first time, Ukrainian commanders could see the battlefield as a living system. They could anticipate Russian movements, detect supply patterns, identify weak points, predict offensives. War became predictive, not reactive. That alone changed everything. Then came precision. Western rocket systems, guided artillery, and counter-battery radar allowed Ukraine to strike deep and accurately. Russian ammunition depots, fuel reserves, command centers, repair facilities, rail junctions all became vulnerable. Instead of fighting Russia's mass directly, Ukraine dismantled its support structure. It was surgical, it was relentless, and it was devastating. Russian frontline units were left undersupplied, disoriented, exhausted, isolated, and vulnerable. Morale collapsed. Coordination failed. Mistakes multiplied. Air defense became another pillar. Layered systems protected major cities. Hospitals stayed operational. Power grids were stabilized. Factories reopened. Schools resumed. Daily life became possible again. And when life becomes possible, resistance becomes sustainable. At sea, Ukraine innovated. With no major navy, it used drones, missiles, and coastal surveillance to challenge Russia's fleet. Warships were damaged, ports reopened, grain exports resumed, economic lifelines were restored. This was asymmetric warfare at its most sophisticated. It turned weakness into advantage. Equally important was training. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers rotated through Western programs. They learned combined arms tactics, urban warfare, counter-drone operations, battlefield medicine, leadership under pressure. They returned home as multipliers, teaching others, standardizing practices, raising performance. The Ukrainian military became a learning institution. Mistakes were analyzed, not hidden. Lessons were shared, not buried. Adaptation became routine. Russia's system, by contrast, punished initiative. Commanders feared reporting problems. Failures were concealed. Innovation was risky. The institution froze, and frozen institutions fail. Logistics became a national priority. Repair hubs were built. Spare parts stockpiled. Maintenance teams trained. Medical evacuation expanded. Rehabilitation centers opened. Psychological care programs developed. Ukraine treated its soldiers as people, not numbers. That choice preserved experience, sustained morale, built trust. Russia chose expendability, mobilized troops with minimal training, sent them to the front, accepted high casualties, suppressed information, ignored trauma. The result was burnout, desertion, and despair. Ukrainian industry transformed. Garages became drone labs. Startups became defense suppliers. Universities became research centers. Volunteers became logisticians. Civilian and military spheres merged, not through coercion, through cooperation. Every citizen became part of resilience. Sanctions accelerated Russia's decline, not through sudden collapse, through erosion. Access to advanced components vanished. Manufacturing degraded. Maintenance became impossible. Complex systems deteriorated. Over time, Russia lost technological parity. Ukraine gained it. Western partners noticed. Support deepened. Planning integrated. Confidence grew. Ukraine became a collaborator, not a client. For Putin, this was catastrophic. Every Ukrainian success strengthened Western unity. Every Russian failure weakened Moscow's position. Isolation deepened. Dependence increased. Prestige vanished. And still, Ukraine advanced slowly, carefully, methodically, not for spectacle, for sustainability. By 2024, the war had become a contest between systems, adaptation versus denial. Transparency versus secrecy, participation versus coercion. Ukraine had built a system designed to learn. Russia had preserved a system designed to obey. And in modern conflict, learning always defeats obedience. There is a moment in every authoritarian system when power stops feeling permanent. When leaders who once moved with confidence begin to hesitate, when orders are repeated, when meetings multiply, when decisions are delayed, when loyalty becomes performative instead of instinctive. For Vladimir Putin, that moment arrived when it became clear that Ukraine was not going to collapse and that the world was not going to move on. From that point forward, this war was no longer just about territory. It was about survival, personal, political, historical, survival. For more than 2 decades, Putin had governed through predictability. He offered elites wealth and security in exchange for obedience. He offered citizens stability in exchange for political silence. He offered institutions protection in exchange for loyalty. It was a bargain. And for years, it worked. The war shattered it. Because war produces evidence, evidence of incompetence, evidence of corruption, evidence of miscalculation, evidence of vulnerability, and evidence is dangerous in systems built on myth. Inside the Kremlin, the atmosphere changed first. Access to the president became restricted. Advisors were filtered. Briefings were rewritten. Bad news was delayed. Negative assessments softened. Reality was curated, not because Putin demanded lies, because everyone feared truth. They feared being blamed. They feared losing status. They feared becoming expendable. Fear replaced honesty. And honesty is the foundation of effective governance. Without it, leaders operate in fog. Military leadership became unstable. Commanders were rotated frequently. Some were promoted suddenly.